welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by a writer who is here actually in her capacity as an editor and writer, who is here to discuss an absolutely gorgeous volume of travel writing. So welcome to the show. I'm so glad to talk to you. Could I please ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alden Jones, and my book is Edge of the World, which is an anthology of queer travel writing, so travel essays by LGBTQ writers.
It's such a lovely collection, and I am really curious about, your journey to this project. Could you talk a little bit about your writing career and how you got interested in travel writing?
Sure. So I was a fiction writer, and back in the 90s, until that's when I was starting out as a writer, until the late 90s, there wasn't really a memoir genre as we know it today. You wrote autobiographical stuff as fiction. So it never occurred to me to write nonfiction, except that I was a traveler. I had a parallel career as a travel educator, and I'd done a lot of traveling around the world as a teacher and a trip leader. And I was at NYU, and part of my fellowship was opening the mail. I worked in the office, and I opened the mail. And one day there was this little magazine that came to NYU called Grand Tour, the Journal of Travel Literature. And I was like, ooh, travel literature, maybe I'll give that a try. So I wrote an essay. Meanwhile, I'm sending out fiction, getting rejection after rejection. And so I wrote an essay about living on a coffee farm in Costa Rica with an evangelical family that did not believe in drinking coffee and having to make friends in town so I could get coffee, and also some other things. Then it was published immediately and wound up in Best American Travel Writing, and I got an agent, and I was like, maybe I should try this travel writing thing. So, and of course, you could get paid for magazine travel writing back in the 90s. You could get paid pretty well. So I sort of started doing both fiction and travel writing. My first book was The Blind Masseuse, and that was a travel memoir. And my second book was Unaccompanied Minors, which is a book of short stories. So I do toggle back and forth, but I'm definitely very interested in the genre of travel writing, what it can do, and of course, fiction set in foreign locales that deal with cross-cultural situations. So in terms of this book, I was at a party it was at AWP, which is the big writers conference, and we were celebrating a editor from the University of Wisconsin Press named Rafi Kadushin, and he had started really the only list of gay and lesbian travel writing. And they were all divided between gay and lesbian. And so I'm at the party like, what about everyone else, So what if we did like why doesn't a collection of all queer travel essays, why doesn't that exist yet? And then I immediately realized that I had to do it. So I started asking people, and I found a couple of reprints that from Alexandra Chee and Edmund White that I thought would be, useful for the proposal, as well as essays I really loved for the collection. And then I started asking people, and most of them wrote new pieces. So yeah, that was it. This idea came to me in 2016, and then COVID happened as I was starting to turn to this project after my last book. And then we put it on hold because nobody was thinking about travel. And then as soon as we started thinking about it again, we made it happen.
That's so interesting. And yeah, I'm really interested in the way that the various pieces sort of speak to each other and how how does the selection of the order in which they're presented aid in that? Like when you are editing a volume of essays or short stories or anything, what factors go into the sort of ordination process, as it were?
Right. The wild card factor was not knowing what was going to come in, because I would ask a writer to write something and then I wouldn't know what the tone, I wouldn't really necessarily know what the tone would be or how long it would be. And so once I got enough to start looking at what we had and what gaps there were and filling a couple of gaps in the end, then I had to figure out, how to balance the tone because I wanted to sort of invite the reader in the beginning. So Andrew Ellis Evans wrote this gorgeous sort of whirlwind not vacation, but trip around the world for various reasons with his foreign boyfriend who became his husband. And that was such a like complete journey that I thought that would be nice to start with. And he's such a prolific travel writer and has written for National Geographic for many years. And then it was, like balancing, separating, like there were two essays that involved Cuba, so I wanted to separate them a little bit. It didn't occur to me how many people would have girlfriends named Kate. So that was a funny thing that I wound up having two essays right next to each other with Kate's. So that was my only like, oops. Like I hope no one gets confused about that. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that anything heavy was followed by something, a little more uplifting and maybe something funny before something longer and more serious. And I wanted to end on a happy note. And it was sort of bookended in an interesting way because Andrew Ellis Evans is such a prolific, established travel writer. And then KB Brookins at the end has an essay about their first time leaving the US as an adult. So, and it's very sort of like I discovered a pride in Mexico that made me understand what I want to bring back to the States. So I thought that was a nice note to end on.
It is. Both those pieces are absolutely gorgeous. I read something that you had said. I read it in an interview, and I forget if it is in the book itself. But you said somewhere that travel itself is inherently queer. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I found that very interesting.
Sure. I think it's something I talked about in the introduction, which is until the internet, if you were queer, you had to travel to find your people because most people didn't find their queer community at home. So there is something about the journey that I think is inherent to queer people. And yeah, I think, we tend to travel to where we can find each other. So there is this, like I always think of Curve magazine, which was the lesbian lifestyle magazine, which sadly has no longer exists, but it was such a great magazine. And they had a travel issue one year that covered Ireland. And it was, a few different completely unrelated destinations, like a lesbian B&B in Galway and some music over here in the outskirts. And everywhere we went, there were lesbians carrying Curve magazine. And on the same exact trip that we were on. And that was really fun. And so, yeah, I think there is something about finding each other when you travel and connecting with people who aren't necessarily from your environment that I think is really inherent in the queer community.
Hmm. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think there's always some degree in travel of, getting away from your natural environs and all of the things that have conditioned you to be who you are and meeting yourself when you are in a new environment, meeting new people. But that does have a special sort of chargedness or importance when you are also queer and perhaps like not accepted at home. So it's an absolutely fascinating idea. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about like how travel can reveal yourself to you, perhaps, like as you say, get outside of your environment?
It definitely brings out the parts of you that might feel too dangerous to bring out at home. I think I've seen this over and over again with my students. They try things that they wouldn't try at home, like, oh, we're canoeing down a lake and there's a waterfall you can jump off. Like, why not try it? There's just something about a permission that you have when you're not at home. And I think, for me, that was really tied to my queerness as well, because I had my internalized homophobia that I was grappling with. But then when I went abroad, it was like, well, like nobody here is from home and I can risk more. And that was really important to my story. And I think just taking away the context, it's, taking away your routines. You get to really know yourself in a different way because you have to construct your daily routine or your daily experience. And yeah, I think it's for me, I've done this travel education for a long time, and I see students completely changed by the end of the trip and just willing to take many more risks and more confidence. I think it really brings a confidence being able to move through the world and know that you're going to hit snags and to know that you can get through them.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many people who studied abroad had that experience of really, that really felt more like a coming of age than whatever it was that I did at home, because you do discover things about yourself and new skills. And there's something interesting about, meeting people who are in some ways unlike you, but in others are very like you, and finding a new home where you go.
Exactly. Yeah. And, finding those queer spaces is so exciting, especially back before you could look them up on the internet. It was like you had to find the people, and where would you find them? And in Cuba, when it was very dangerous to be gay in the 80s, when you could, get basically sent to an island to, if you had HIV, or, arrested if you were gay, they used to have a little system where right outside the movie theater called Cine Yara, people would hang out, and you would just go and say, like, where's the party? And they were called peso parties. I've been to one, which is very, very fun. But you just had to find out where they were, and it was at someone's house, but it was sort of an underground whisper network. And, it's like you find people in this kind of secretive way, especially back then. And it's like you cross a threshold into a different world when you enter these spaces, and you're like, oh, my people, but you don't know anyone. But it's much more like when I was in Guatemala. I was in Antigua, Guatemala, with my then fiance, and we saw a restaurant that had Frida Kahlo big mural on the side. We're like, well, this is probably really cheesy and touristy, but let's go and try it. And we went in, and we were looking around like, these are gay people. We found the gay spot. Like, how did we do that? We just walked right in. So it is always really a thrill when you're like, oh, my people. And there is an automatic friendliness when you enter these spaces that you don't necessarily find as easily in straight places.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up, the temporal aspect of it. Some of the essays are, very contemporary, recent, and some take place a couple decades ago or in various periods before now. And there's something so interesting about just the sort of the wide array of identities of the authors, the cultures of the countries in that they are traveling to, and the time period and the context for that particular place at that particular time. Were you surprised by the sort of the wide geographical coverage you got? Because it's such a, gosh, like, yeah, I'm just wondering, like, when you got pieces from people that you talked to, was there anything there that really surprised you?
I don't think anything completely surprised me. I did have the authors each write a little summary of what they thought they were going to write about, so that I could balance the geographies. And it was really important to me also to get age diversity. So, from young writers like Zoe Sprankle is in her 20s, and she wrote a gorgeous essay about, the first time falling in love, and how you're going to get your heart shredded and you have to do it anyway. And then some writers, Edmund White, who's in his 80s, writing about Key West. And I love the piece by Sarah Orozco that's about being arrested at a gay club at a raid in the 80s in South Carolina, completely unexpected. And again, one of those places, like a warehouse in the middle of nowhere, that you had to drive around until you could hear the bass. So I did want to make sure I got some stories from pre-internet traveling and what it was like in the 80s, of course, when things were much more homophobic. And also some youthful voices. I think we sometimes skip youthful voices as well. So I tried to get, geography, identity, different kinds of queerness, different kinds of stories from, a road trip in Ohio. That's Den Michelle Norris, just driving back and forth between New York City and home in Ohio is travel. And so is Andrew Ellis Evans, jet setting around the entire world. So I did have my eye on all different kinds of pluralism when I started putting it together.
Nice. We've talked a lot about already, what you learn about yourself as you are traveling. Does writing about that travel then like compound that experience? Are there further insights or sort of ideas that you get as you, process the memories?
It took me a while to really figure out the travel essay. I think at first you spend a lot of time thinking, oh, it's really about the place and I'm supposed to make the place interesting, and you forget to put yourself in it. And when I started teaching travel writing, I started to think about, what's missing? We don't want to be like me, but we also don't want to be just the place with no character to attach to. So, finding out like what did you learn or how did you change in this place? And sometimes, yes, writing helps you process that. And it's usually not like overall I changed like this. It's like I learned a specific thing about this specific quality of myself. So really looking at the smaller moments and seeing if they can serve as an objective correlative for the bigger picture of what it means to travel and to change due to travel.
Well, and I think that having a very present protagonist that is the writer, is really important for especially a queer anthology of writing because, yeah, travel is going to be a very subjective experience depending on who you are, where you're going, and when you're going, and where within that place. So I think it provides a more nuanced picture of the phenomenon of queer travel.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Are you working on anything else at the moment? I've heard that you have received a fellowship to write a novel. Are you able to talk about that at all, or?
Oh, well, I did get a Fulbright, but now I'm not sure if it's going to happen because who knows what's happening. So this is actually a project that I'm working on with Fina So, who is a publisher in Phnom Penh. She has a publishing house called Kampumera. And when I met with her when I was in Cambodia in 2023, thanks to my assistant Carly McGoldrick, we met, and at the end I said, is there any way I can thank you for your time? And she said, well, I am a writer. I've written all these books, but I don't know how to talk about writing. And we don't have any creative writing education at all in Cambodia. There's this one school, but it's, kind of hard to access. And would you be able to give a Zoom workshop? So I said, of course. And I recruited 2 graduate students to help me teach these classes. And I saw a real opportunity for, an exchange in terms of this is a great way to get some teaching experience for some graduate students, as well as, providing a needed service to the writing community. So Fina and I started talking about doing a longer program, which the Fulbright specialist is a short-term program. So while this is also research for my novel, it's specifically to teach a 2 to 3 week creative writing class where I teach both creative writing, as a teacher to creative writing students, and then also teach pedagogy. So how to teach creative writing to writers in Cambodia so that they can teach in Khmer. So that is hopefully the plan for 2026, but I did get to go on a separate fellowship to Vietnam and Cambodia in 2022, 2023. And all of this is, basic. I'm meanwhile gathering information for the novel, which is stalled, I got to be honest, because I have a different project that's, when projects just bust through and say, no, you've got to work on me first.
Yep.
So that's happening. So I got to clear that one off my plate. And then the novel is a much more complicated, bigger project. And it began right after I'd been to Cambodia the first time in 2006. And then I came home and happened upon a documentary about the deforestation that's happening in this area that was protected by Khmer Rouge landmines for a really long time. So it's this very lush, rich, natural environment where things grow that don't grow anywhere else in the world. And one of the trees being systematically targeted was the ancient sassafras tree, which was used to distill the oil from the tree. And saffron oil, it turns out, is a precursor for MDMA. And I had no idea. Of course, I thought, MDMA is made in a lab, and it didn't occur to me that these lab chemicals had to come from somewhere because I'm not really a science person. And once I thought about that, I was like, wow, this is really a starting point for thinking about the ways we affect each other without knowing it, and knowing especially in the case of like the love and happy drug, and, it's causing this mass destruction across the world. So, I started thinking about, of course, the war in Vietnam and the bombing campaign in Cambodia and how that was connected to the United States. Obviously, it was waged by the United States, and all the things in between in the past 50 years since the Khmer Rouge it's actually this week is the anniversary of the Khmer Rouge taking Phnom Penh.
Oh, wow.
So there's just so little about Cambodia during that time because artists were targeted by the Khmer Rouge, and there are very few artist elders to teach the crafts. So I saw a gap, and I saw like a lot of story that I felt could be really interesting to dive into. So that's after the next project.
Wow. Well, Godspeed on all of those projects. That novel
Thank
sounds
you.
fascinating, and yeah, the teaching all sounds so cool. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us and sharing your book with us. It's been really lovely.
Thank you so much, Jen. It was really nice. Yes. Thank you.
All right, listeners, please check out Edge of the World, an anthology of queer travel writing. It is absolutely gorgeous. It makes a great gift, I think. It is just truly a full of really, really beautiful, insightful, moving writing. So please check it out. Okay, it is time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.